Right now, let's talk about the case of Peter Sullivan. He is the man who 38 years ago was convicted of the horrific violent murder of Diane Sindall, a 21-year-old woman who was beaten to death in 1986. There was DNA evidence to say he was the man responsible. He always protested his innocence. Again and again, he sought to appeal his conviction. It first tried to challenge it in 2008. The Criminal Cases Review Commission declined to refer the case to the Court of Appeal. He lost his own appeal bid back in 2019. He asked again for his case to be referred in 2021. At that point, it's when they found that DNA samples did not match his. There were new developments in DNA technology. He has now been freed. His conviction was quashed yesterday in an extraordinarily sort of mundane appeal court announcement. A man who has spent 38 years behind bars, he's now 68 years old, has been freed after spending all that time behind bars for a crime he never, ever committed. He says he's not bitter, but he has talked about the pain of being stripped of his youth. Well, let's talk about this case with David Shipley. He's a former prisoner himself, is now a writer and researcher on prison and justice issues. A very good morning to you, David. Thank you for joining us. Of course, I mean, this is an outrageous miscarriage of justice. He's believed to be the UK's longest-serving victim of a miscarriage of justice. This after the case of Andrew Malkinson, cleared of rape back in 2023, where DNA identified another suspect after he spent 17 years behind bars. First of all, how common do you believe this is? Are there a huge number of cases that are where we have people who are behind bars for crimes they simply did not commit?
I don't think so. I think most people in prison are there because they're guilty of. But what we do see in cases like Peter's is appalling mishandling of this by the police. If you look back at what happened, they interviewed this man who was described as very vulnerable. A psychologist said that if he was interviewed today by the police, he'd have to have an appropriate adult there as well as a lawyer. The police didn't give him any of that. They interviewed him without a lawyer, refused to let him have a lawyer. Essentially, it seemed bullied a confession out of him. And that was actually, even though this was the 80s, you might think it was the era of sort of, ashes to ashes, even then, this was illegal because the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act had changed how they were supposed to be doing interviews. So he shouldn't have been interviewed like this in 86 and 87, but he was.
Why then? I mean, again, the DNA evidence, the ability to sort of read DNA evidence, to analyse it, has massively improved again. And we know for many years juries have been told, oh, it's DNA evidence, that's incontrovertible, tick, tick, job done, he's guilty. That's not the case. There's big question marks about a lot of DNA evidence. We know as things change, these cases are sometimes are falling apart. But why then, when his first challenge went to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the body that gets to decide whether there's enough to, again, this relates to the Lucy Letby case now, ongoing, why then did they not say, yeah, this case needs to be referred to Court of Appeal, we need to look at this again, because clearly, A, B and C shouldn't have happened, and that would make this conviction unsafe?
That's a really good question. I think one the CCRC needs to answer. And we saw this actually with Malkinson. They took a long time to act. And it's interesting you mentioned Lucy Letby. One of the similarities between Peter's case and Lucy's is that Peter was also convicted on the basis of expert witness evidence. A dental expert said that the bite marks on the victim's body could only have been made by Peter's teeth. We now know that was complete nonsense. And there is this tendency in prosecutions to rely on expert evidence, which is this is absolutely certain. And it's clearly shown not to be. And I think the CCRC maybe need to be a bit more open to revisiting cases.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I've sat on a jury a couple of years ago and the first time, and I was really impressed with how much care and thought people on the jury put into listening, taking in the case and making the decision that was made. And I was really impressed that I had renewed faith in the justice system at the point at which it comes to court. But I'm thinking, if I was in a court, even as a journalist with the experience I've got covering these sort of cases, and I was told there's DNA evidence saying he was there, semen samples or whatever, at the scene of this, or something like that. That there's an expert witness saying the bite marks could only have been him. He's made a confession. I mean, what jury wouldn't convict on that basis? But when there's question marks about all aspects of that, it's the fact that we know mistakes will be made. We try and, ensure we have a system where it's beyond reasonable doubt. But that doubt can change depending on the information that comes to us. It seems to me that part of the problem is not just what the police did at that point, the failure of the court to challenge that at the time, but also every single year since, a failure to say, hold on a minute, this is an unsafe conviction, and leaving a man languishing behind bars for the best part of 4 decades while they just went, not a big deal.
I think that's it. The system is very callous sometimes. They've stolen Peter's life. He's now an old man. He's nearly 70. And what we see as well is they tend to be then very slow about paying compensation. Andrew Malkinson, who was released in 2023, still hasn't been fully compensated.
Yeah, and asking for him to pay for his room and board in prison all those years. I mean, obscene stuff.
Yeah, and I think, a moral justice system, when it makes an error like this, would apologise completely. Peter, Andrew Malkinson, these people should be taken straight to a lovely house and looked after, because we can't give them back their life.
I'd give them a Caribbean island. I mean, literally, you have everything you want for the rest of your life. We've stolen so much of it. This is the thing. We have a justice system, we discussed this earlier, we supposed to be people, if your freedom can be taken away from you, it should be beyond reasonable doubt. And we have a justice system where if it's not reasonable doubt, if it's not unreasonable, then you can't convict. And the idea is that, yes, 9 guilty men may go free, but we cannot afford to have one behind bars who is innocent. But we need to have a system that recognises that does happen and speeding up. Is the Criminal Cases Review Commission, are they part of the problem rather than what they ostensibly are, part of the solution?
I think they need to be bolder about looking at cases. I think they're often quite reluctant to reopen cases, and they maybe need to just be a little bit more open to reviewing things. I think there's a resistance, and they have a very, very...
If that's their job, that's their raison d'etre, why would they resist that?
I think that they have a very, very high bar for reopening a conviction. I think there's a sense...
There has to be clear new evidence. Someone has come forward and said, no, I did it.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. And I think there's a sense in which the justice system doesn't want to show weakness, sort of as an organisation. And the idea might be, if convictions can constantly be challenged, that might undermine justice in some way. But I disagree with that. But I think there's a culture within the Ministry of Justice, the leadership end, of trying to protect the organisation and trying to follow process rather than trying to be just and make sure that justice is done.
I think that's a massive issue, isn't it? In terms of getting justice done, I must ask you also about the announcement that, under government plans, looking for prisoners to be released from prison as little as a third of the way through their sentences. If they behave well, they can earn their freedom. A third of their sentence, they complete work, training, education assignments, good behaviour, etc., etc. Then they currently automatic early release 40% of the way through their sentence. I mean, for the most violent offenders, terrorists, sex offenders, they're supposed to serve their full sentence. But for years, no one has served their full sentence unless they are, throwing boiling water or stabbing prison guards. I think most people, you've been behind bars, you now research on these issues. I think most people, whether they've been a victim of crime or not, think that sentencing someone to, whether it's 1 year or 10 years, and then say you can only serve a third of it, makes an absolute mockery of a justice system. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm at the Prison Officers Association conference today, and I was just speaking to a prison officer before I came on air, and she was making exactly that point, saying that, you give someone a 10-year sentence and they only actually spend 3 years behind bars, that starts to feel ridiculous. And I think there's a challenge there. One of the ideas with offering early release for good behaviour is actually it would improve behaviour in prisons, because if prisoners know that if they stay peaceful and obedient and compliant and follow the rules and aren't violent, then they can get out earlier. That more prisoners would choose peace rather than violence. And that's today we've heard there's been an attack on a prison officer at Woodhill. So this is an ongoing issue. Yeah. The problem, I think, is that you need that incentive to be quite big. And currently, as you said, prisoners get out 40% of the way through. So moving that to 33% if you behave well is not a huge difference. It's maybe a matter of
shouldn't it be
months.
The other way round? And that, you serve your sentence, and I would say you serve all of your sentence, but we will add on time for every time there is any violence. I mean, that would seem to me to be the obvious way of doing it. Same incentive. I'd just say bit stick rather than carrot. I think it's a lie to tell a victim of crime, that someone's been sentenced. We do this, like 10 years for this person, but they're not serving 10 years. It's a lie.
Yeah, and I think that is that is confusing and people don't like it. I think there's an argument you probably want carrot and stick to get the best outcome. But I think they were originally talking about mimicking the Texas model. Under the Texas model, the assumption is you will do your full sentence and then you have to pass a parole board to be released. And if you behave badly, the parole board will continue to hold up your release. But if you behave really well and you do all the right things, you can get an earlier parole hearing.
Yeah.
That, I think, has strong carrot and stick.
But again, also
drives better behavior.
Doing the education and the training, it has to be actually available, not you be not locked in your cell for 23 hours a day. David Shipley, I hope you'll come on the show again. So appreciate you joining us from that conference. Former prisoner himself, now a writer on prisoner justice issues. Thank you for that. Claire Pearsall, former Conservative government advisor, you were at the Home Office. I know you don't deal with prisons and criminal justice, but it's very much tied in, isn't it? Because you guys were dealing with the policing end of things.
Yeah.
But people have had enough with this nonsense.
Well, they have, and I don't blame them. You want criminals to be put in prison for the good of us all and to complete their sentence.
And is it a deterrent?
Absolutely is. And I do think we need to look more at education and what 100%. We do in prisons.
We need to spend more on it.
Yeah, we do. And I think that's where people then start to go, really, do we have to? And it's like, yeah, because if you don't want these people to reoffend, you actually need to give them a reason not to.
It will save more money in the long run.
It will do.
Again, absolutely, yeah. Again, you put more into families and schools, you wouldn't see them, community policing, you wouldn't see them behind bars in the first place.